This is our hydrating malt mill. The grain flows into the mill, so when it cracks it, you're still getting grits, but the exterior, the husk, has been softened up enough that it doesn't shatter. So we use a variety of other kinds of malted grains. That one says rye. Started out in 1980 culturing our own yeast, so we had our own yeast collection. The maturation process on yeast imparts characters that you don't get from other means of carbonating. Celebration is one. We actually tried it. Tried a batch with not bottle conditioning it.
Yeah.
And
this is the third part of my amazing day with Ken Grossman, the founder of Sierra Nevada. Thank you so much for watching. Your views and support make these conversations entirely possible. Now, hitting that subscribe button is also transformative to the channel. But oddly, 73% of you have not done so yet. So if you like what you see, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons to fuel our growth and increase our clout so we can get in even more awesome guests. Thank you and cheers.
so this is our hydrating malt mill. So it's a bit unique. There's a number of them in the U.S. I bought the first one to be installed in the U.S. from Bootman. And what's unique about it is it's a two-roll mill. They do make some four-roll versions of this. But up here in the hopper would be where the grain is charged. And so this hopper will hold over 10,000 pounds, depending on what we're brewing, anywhere from 10 to 12 or 14,000 pounds of malted barley and other malts. And as the grain flows into the mill, there's a feed roller that feeds it at a consistent flow rate. It's got water sprays that start spraying the malt right in that chamber. So it's dry up there,
Yeah.
and it's getting moistened there. And it travels through, you can see, I can't see much. There's big corrugated rollers in here. It's a bit of hard to look through the window there, but very.
This is a dust-free malt room.
It's a dust-free malt room.
That's an oxymoron, isn't it?
Well, that's why I chose to go this route, because you don't know about explosion.
Wow.
And so the malt is just dampened, less than a minute of soak time in the chamber, and the interior is still dry, so when it cracks it, you're still getting grits, but the exterior, the husk, has been softened up enough that it doesn't shatter, and so you end up with a very intact husk and grits from the interior, the grain being dry. There were some earlier versions of these that were called wet mills, where the big hopper would be full of water, and would soak the malt, and then it would mill it, and it would squeeze it more than pulverizing like this does. And those were problematic and had a lot of issues, so you don't see many of those around anymore. But this was designed by one of the Lenz brothers, who was the Hoopman owners before Gia bought Hoopman, and they came up with this concept, I don't know, probably 30 years ago or more. Yeah, so we use a variety of other kinds of malted grains. That one says rye, so we have some rye malt here. You can malt a whole variety of grains. You can malt rice, you can malt wheat, obviously oats, barley, rye. So the malting process is essentially just the beginning of germination of the grain, and it does a number of things. It changes the structure of the starch. It develops enzymes that can then be activated in the mash tun. And so we use super sacks of a lot of varieties of grains. We use bags. We have a bag break station over here. So if we're doing a specialty thing, we want 50 pounds of a certain kind of malt, we can just dump that in. And then these are all weighed in line on the way to the grist case. So we have a scale hopper up above. And so the recipe calls for 8,000 pounds of pale malt. It comes from big silos behind us. So the only malts in here are specialty malts. We have we have pale malt silos, and we have roasted malt silos outside, which we can look at as well. And the small silos for the roasted malts, one truckload, essentially 50,000 pounds. Our big silos are almost 300,000 pounds.
So a little bit of caramel malts comes through here.
A little bit, and so those would come, caramel malt we'd have in a big silo. We'd have in a 50,000 pound silo. But or generally we would. We might have some in some super sacks as well. But primarily what we do in here, what we handle by hand in super sacks would be things like rye malt.
Okay.
Used in smaller quantities.
What do you brew with rye?
We make a beer called Ruthless Rye.
I know that one.
Yep. We've been doing a little bit of that again.
Okay. I was wondering if there were some others.
We put rye in a number of things. There's probably some next door with some rye in it that aren't called rye beer as well.
Okay.
Yeah, rye imparts a unique character to
It does. It does. I like it.
Something that's probably a little unique is that we started out in 1980 culturing our own yeast. So we had our own yeast collection. And back in that era, there had been a handful of yeast labs, it's not just yeast labs, but a handful of support laboratories for the brewing industry. Wallerstein, Schwartz, Siebel were laboratories that were supporting the small brewing industry of the historical small brewing industry. And they all went out of business other than Siebel, which got bought and moved out of, I think they're different company now. But and so they were beer schools and support laboratories. And so when we were starting to brew, we got in touch with those companies and got all the yeast they had. And then we started collecting yeast on our own from other breweries, from some European collections. And so I've got logs of us back in the homebrew days of having our own yeast collection. And we learned how to plate and culture back as homebrewers, so in the late 70s. And we maintain and still do today maintain our own collection of yeast strains. And so we propagate up from a slant. So, essentially from a single cell, we propagate those yeasts up into pitchable quantities on site.
So you bottle condition not only Celebration, but a few of your other beers.
Pale ale. Yeah. I mean, I think between our pale ale and the other beers we bottle condition, we're either the largest in the world or Cooper's might be a little bigger now than us bottle conditioning. But there's not very many of us who have pretty significant bottle conditioning.
So that's a champagne-like process.
It is.
Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, it is. And again, going back to our early Davis consulting years, one of the grad students said, you're going to have to bottle condition. You got nothing else you can do. And we knew that. And so we started out, as a home brewer would, and putting fermentable extract and yeast in the bottle. Initially, we didn't have a really great way to control how many cells we were putting in our finished beer. We didn't filter. We had no filtration, no clarification step. And so we would rack our beer out of a storage tank. We had a little standpipe. We would have enough yeast carryover that it was enough to initiate bottle conditioning. But we would have some batches where we got a lot of yeast in the bottle. We had more growth than we were anticipating in the fermenter, and our standpipe was so high, and we would send a lot of yeast in. So back in 1980, 81, you'd have a 1/4 inch of yeast in some bottles and an 1/8 inch in another one. Today, we're very scientific about it. So we add an exact amount of cells of yeast to every bottle condition product. And so we control it. So some people have said, well, you don't bottle condition anymore. I don't see yeast in the bottom. There is yeast in the bottom. And if you let it settle out and put it under a microscope, shake the bottom, you'll see there's live active.
A little bit.
Yeah, live active yeast.
That's a non-trivial process. This isn't a cheat code for beer. What is, I guess, for people that don't fully appreciate, that are not home brewers, and they get a bottle conditioned beer, how much extra effort goes into that?
A ton. So we have to, make sure that the yeast that goes into the bottle condition process is healthy, is active, is no contamination, doesn't have a lot of true protein attached to it. And so that's our top yeast when we go through all of our yeast ranks. So we harvest yeast out of our fermentation process. So at the end of fermentation, yeast sediments out. We throw away the first portion. We harvest the next portion, and then we store that for hopefully as little time as possible. Less than 3 days is ideal. And then we go through those tanks of yeast and pick the one that's the most healthy and vibrant, so that it can do the bottle conditioning process. Last thing you want to do is take 800 barrels of beer, 25,000 gallons of beer, and put a yeast in that doesn't perform, doesn't get the job done to carbonate. And so we pay really close attention to the quality of the yeast that goes in for bottle conditioning. And then, it's a very scientific process. We, very accurately batch it out. Then the lab here does checks throughout the whole packaging run to make sure the cell count is in proper percentage. We've been doing it long enough. We know it'll work, and so we've perfected that process pretty well.
But there are easier ways to carbonate beer.
Oh, much easier, yeah.
So why do you bottle condition?
We've even done some experiments where we took a bottle conditioned beer that we normally bottle condition, like pale ale, and we've carbonated it with forced carbonation. It tastes different, definitely noticeably different. The maturation process on yeast imparts characters that you don't get from other means of carbonating. It adds another couple weeks to the process. So, our bottle conditioned beers are 4 to 5 weeks for a top fermenting beer, which is pretty long compared to, a normal ale might be done in 10 to 12 days or 14 days or something.
So you've got to commit some real estate.
Yeah. So we have large warehousing that's temperature controlled, both breweries. And so the beer sits in there for 2 weeks. It gets sampled, regularly tasted, and it goes through a similar maturation process as a fermenter would. And so you get some diacetyl formation when the yeast starts to eat the sugars, and then that gets absorbed. And so it goes through a whole maturing process that we taste for and don't release it until the beer is fully fermented out and the diacetyl has been reduced by the yeast itself. But the benefit we also get from it is yeast is a great oxygen scavenger. And so when you're packaging, or even after packaging with air ingress through the bottle cap, some oxygen does absorb back into the liner. The yeast can absorb that. So while the yeast is alive, which may be a matter of a month or more, depending on storage conditions and whatnot, it's reducing that oxygen in the package.
Well, celebration does seem to be a crescendo. I'm beginning to understand that. And the effort that's required is just phenomenal.
So celebration is one. We actually tried it, tried a batch with not bottle conditioning it.
Yeah.
And didn't taste the same. And so we went back to the bottle conditioning process.
But you don't charge $1 more per case anymore.
No.
So, it really is one of the premium beers at Sierra Nevada. It's not only seasonal. To me, it is a crescendo. It's like one of the best you brew all year long.
Yeah, we get asked a lot to make it available all year long. But besides just the difficulties, the idea of using the hops right when they're picked really is part of that beer. And to brew celebration with year or 2-year-old hops, which might be fine for other products, you don't get quite the aroma profile you do with fresh aromatic hops.
Well, Ken, as we wrap up, and you see going forward for the brewery, you've got, I would say, celebration is done almost in a primitive fashion compared to a lot of your other beers here. How do you see your ability to continue to scale and innovate using these primitive methods in maybe one of the most modern and most beautiful breweries I've ever been to?
I don't know if I go quite to primitive. I would say it's traditional.
Traditional. Yes. How about that?
Yeah, that's better. Again, a product like Celebration, we've been doing it. It's one of the longest seasonal beers made anywhere in the world. I take that back. There's some in Europe that go back generations. So, but for us, it is something that we hold near and dear, and it's one we don't want to monkey with as far as how we brew it or what we put in it.
So what's in your refrigerator?
Right now, Celebration. That's what I've been drinking. I have a lot of friends in the brewing industry, so I get a lot of beers sent to me from a variety of people. So right now, my refrigerator is a whole range of stuff. I'm staying at my son's house, and so he's got Celebration. We've got our Harvest Ale,
Yeah.
which is one that's done with the wet hops. So he's got some of that in there. He's got some other torpedo variants. So all range of things. So I don't drink one style, although this time of year I'll drink mainly Celebration. But I like to move around. I was drinking, there's a great Rausch beer in the pub right now that Scott brewed. And then, so I'm open to pretty much all flavors and styles, and rarely turn a beer down.
Well, let me know what you think about Ken's obsession with high quality beer in the comments below. And videos 1 and 2 of my day with Ken are equally fascinating as we continue our discussion in Sierra Nevada's open fermentation and hop rooms. And if you found value in this video, please smash that like button. It really supports us in creating more content just like this. And check out these videos on screen. They've actually been carefully selected just for you, and they're filled with even more brewing insights and tips. Thank you, and cheers.